Thank you very much. Just before I kick off, quick introduction to me. I'm James. I've worked for Thoughtworks for the last 4 years. This is a timeline of Thoughtworks. If you're interested in Thoughtworks, have a look at our website. And here are some books written by Thoughtworks people. That's all the marketing slides you'll get from me. So just telling, while we wait for people to sit down, what happened to me yesterday. Well, I came to Belarus. I had no idea that medical insurance was obligatory. I left my EU medical insurance card at home because Belarus is not in the EU. They made me join this queue for obligatory medical insurance. I was expecting a bill of hundreds of pounds or something. It turned out to be €4, so I don't know why they couldn't just take the money off me at the gate, but hey. And then, of course, the flight it stopped in Warsaw, and that flight was late, so then they took us on a bus to the flight to Minsk, so they lost all my luggage. So that's all the luggage I've got. Fortunately, I had my computer with me, and I had all my chargers. What I didn't have is any spare clothes or anything to wash myself with, so I wouldn't get too close to me if I was you. The hotel said they'd help me out, so helpfully they gave me a dressing gown and some slippers, and 6 bottles of shampoo. Because clearly I need 6 bottles of shampoo. Then today I'm walking up here. This is the Presidential Palace, I think it's called, or the Palace of Independence. You guys probably know better than me. A very nice looking building. And this is the conference center. And of course, I still was thinking to myself, well, when I get to the conference, then maybe I can buy some new t-shirts or something. I'm hoping that's a shopping center just over the road, but I can't actually read Cyrillic script, so I've got no idea. At least in other countries where I don't speak the language, I can take a guess. So I get to the conference, I think, well, I'll get a conference t-shirt, because you always get a free conference t-shirt, and they've given me that, a massive cold weather fleece. Very nice, but not particularly useful today. So just to prove this, that's a picture of me last night, so you steer clear if I was you. Okay, so on to serious things. I'm going to talk a bit about Agile stuff. A lot of you have probably worked with Agile, otherwise you wouldn't be sitting here. And in particular, I'm going to talk about how Agile can get a slightly toxified reputation, why that might be, and what we can do to try and fix that. So, I'm going to kick off with asking the question, how did Agile become a dirty word? So, I'm going to start with a quick quiz. Call out if you know the answer. Does anybody know which country that is? Okay, that's Laos. Anybody know what that is? Algeria, thank you. And that one? That's the Congo. That is East Timor, or Timor-Leste. That's Ethiopia, thank you. That's representing North Korea, but on Wikipedia I couldn't find something that didn't also highlight South Korea. That is Sri Lanka. And that is Nepal. Does anybody want to hazard a guess as to what all those countries have in common? Okay, so the answer is those are all the countries in the world that have the word democratic in their official name. Does anybody want to take a guess at whether those countries are actually democratic? Well, there's something called the Democratic Index, which can give us an idea of what the answer is. So let's see where these countries rank in terms of democracy. And bear in mind, these are the only countries in the world that have the word democratic in their name. So, I think by most standards, we can see that those countries are not democratic. So, just for comparison's sake, a little quiz. Anybody want to guess at what apparently the most democratic country in the world is? Yeah, not USA, but I've got them on there. The most democratic country is the Kingdom of Norway. Note it has the word kingdom in its name. And of course, me being from London in the UK, I thought I'd check where the UK was on the lists. So we're apparently the 14th most democratic country in the world. And somebody asked about the USA. I thought I'd put that in the list just for comparison, and there they are, the 25th most democratic country in the world. Well, every country I do this talk at, I look up the country that I'm going into, and then when I look at it, sometimes I think to myself, that might be viewed as passive-aggressive if I put that on the screen. So if you're interested, just Google it and you'll find. So why am I saying that? Well, because often what happens is, these two slides are in the wrong order, but I come across my client, this is my client, and he says to me, and this genuinely has happened a few times, right, we're doing Agile. Or you might see job adverts where the company says, we're doing an Agile process. And what that means is they're probably not. It's very unlikely that those people understand what they're doing. So why has Agile become a dirty word? And before we move on to that, there's a lot of other dirty words as well. Depending on the context of where you are, you may find that Agile, Lean, Kanban, Scrum, MVP, all these words could become toxified for one reason or another. So why does that happen? Well, often what happens is something called a cargo cult. I've seen it very, very often where a company comes in and puts a process in place and slavishly follows what the models and what the manuals tell them to do, and nothing good happens. Why is that? And then 2 years down the line, they say, well, we've tried Agile and it doesn't work. Another big problem is often people conflate Scrum with the word Agile. Scrum is a set of processes that you go through to try and enable Agile outcomes, to try and enable Agile culture. It's not Agile in and of itself. But a lot of consultants, a lot of businesses think that if you do Scrum, you're being Agile. And that's a very dangerous state of affairs. And as you can see there, if I Googled for Scrum and Agile and got 33 million results. So in my mind, that means that the two are often conflated in a way that's not helpful to us. This article is from Thoughtworks Perspectives, which is on the Thoughtworks website. We're so concerned with what's called here the rise of fake Agile that a lot of our consultants have been writing about it. I'm talking about it. It's how this notion of Agile has become misappropriated. It's been subject to what Martin Fowler calls semantic diffusion. There are consultants who go around the world saying, I can sell you Agile. And it just doesn't work. And the biggest problem with it often is that after 2 years of a consultant going in there and putting process in place and nothing changing, people start to blame Agile for their problems. What actually is going on is that the problem was always there. Software delivery projects are hard, they fail. They're not failing anymore now, but because the Agile was the thing that changed, people often blame Agile. And that's because of fake Agile, and that's because of the rise of fake Agile. And that's kind of where we are in a lot of places. That's how Agile can become a dirty word. So, what does dirty look like? So, I'll tell you a bit about a lot of the places that I've worked for at Thoughtworks. Somebody releases some code, and it breaks some stuff. If you've ever been in this cycle, you'll know. After that, what does it do? Well, somebody says, well, obviously we need to test this code more before we release it, right? Because it went wrong, so we didn't do enough testing. So we're going to do more testing now. What does more testing mean? It means your cycle time gets pushed out. You take longer and longer between releases because people are doing now weeks and weeks and weeks of manual testing. Maybe you've even got a UAT team that's separate from your development team that goes and does a stack of loads and loads of repetitive testing. So you get longer and longer cycles. What does that mean? Every time you do a release, you release more stuff. Well, why is that a bad thing? Well, if you think about it, if you release one thing and something goes wrong, I think it's pretty obvious what caused the problem. There's only one thing you changed. If you change two things and something goes wrong, well, how many things could have caused that? The answer's not two, the answer's three, because it could have been the first thing, it could have been the second thing, or it could have been an interaction that you didn't anticipate between the first thing and the second thing. So if you release three things, you've got 6 possible problems, and so on. So the number of possible problems you're creating for yourself when you release n things is of order of n squared. And that's the problem that you're building for yourself. So when you release more things, what happens? You get another bad release. And often at Thoughtworks, we find ourselves going into companies that are in this cycle, and they don't know how to get out of that cycle. And they still have what they think are agile teams doing the software development work, but everything else around them is causing this cycle. So they start to blame Agile. Agile is a dirty word for them. Oh, I forgot about that transition. Yeah, that was just because I originally gave this to a client and I wanted to ram the message home. Something else you often see when Agile has become a dirty word is something that we call risk management theatre. Has anybody ever seen this phrase before? So that's my blog post about it, but often you find that there are lots of processes in place that may have been created for a decent reason at some point. Maybe there's a release management process which made sense 10 years ago. Now, people don't quite understand what risk it was managing in the first place. That risk may not exist. In fact, the process may even make the risk more risky. But the process is so entrenched that it's very, very difficult to get rid of it. That's risk management theatre. Sometimes you find entire teams of people whose day-to-day job is servicing checklists, ticking boxes, to make sure they don't get blamed when things go wrong. And that's all they do. So here's an example of risk management theatre, and this technique is something that I'll talk about later in the talk. I was walking with my daughter a few weeks ago, and I saw this sign. And apologies if your English is not so great, but that says, "Caution, broken glass." Now, okay, so there's some broken glass somewhere. You can see that someone's gone to a lot of trouble to fence the area off, and if you look higher up there, those fences at the top there are actually attached to the metal fences. Can you see any broken glass in that picture? Well, it's there. I'll help you out. I'll zoom in a bit. There it is. Somebody's gone to a lot of trouble there because they've obviously got something that says, if there's any broken glass, secure the area. Do you think, why didn't they just clear it up? Those fences stayed there for 3 weeks. It's just ridiculous. Does anybody here use SAFE? Oh, I'm sorry for your loss, sir. On the next slide, there's a phone number for a helpline for you. So SAFE is one of the biggest culprits of fake Agile. This is some SAFE publicity. The 9 principles of SAFE, actually, I quite like those notions, apart from that one, because it has the word synchronize in it. I'll come back to that. But what really scares me about SAFE is this picture on the right, this thing. Because Agile process should be lightweight and should enable you to get to Agile values. But what does SAFE give us? Well, let's have a look at it. This picture just scares me. Does this make sense to anybody? Well, just to drill into it a bit, up there, I like the strategic themes, but you know what? You don't need a process for that. Lean portfolio management sounds good. Lean budgets sounds good. No idea why there should be a backlog at the enterprise level. If you've ever seen my talk on enterprise architecture, you'll know I don't like enterprise architects, and so on and so on. I hate the notion of coordination between teams. This absolutely solves the wrong problem. SAFE is there to try and accept that we have coupling between teams. It's absolutely solving the wrong problem. So again, a backlog at that level. This kind of implies that there's a hierarchy of backlogs, which is mysterious to me in the most sense. I don't even know what that bit means. And large solution is something that you should run a mile from, whatever business you're working in. Economic framework sounds good, but I've got no idea what it means, so I'm prepared to give that a tick. Now, customer, up there on the top right, is obviously good. But why is the customer not down with the dev team? That makes no sense to me. There's at least 3 layers of misdirection in between the customer and the people that are actually servicing the customer in this viewpoint. That is senseless. Don't know what they're doing there. Don't know why there's another backlog. And program, DevOps, why is it there? Again, DevOps is a culture. DevOps is not a team. It's not something that sits aside from your people. I think they just put that in there to try and pretend that they know what it means. And then the worst bit is this whole notion of program increment. Because you have 5 sprint cycles, and then your whole company is supposed to get together and agree between you what stuff's going to happen next. Did some work for a company last year where PI planning, as they called it, involved 50 people in London and 50 people in New York, or not New York, somewhere on the east coast of America. It was a 5-hour meeting for 5 days with 80 people. all to negotiate what they were going to do. The cost of that meeting must have been vast, and the actual money cost. But in terms of the opportunity cost, I dread to think. We sat down with their CTO and said, for the cost of that meeting, you could decouple all those teams. Have you considered doing that? That would solve the real problem. But no, because they follow SAFe, they can't do that. So what do I think of SAFe? I think there's a few more little crosses to come on here. Those bits down the bottom are good because they're to do with other stuff. So what do I really think of SAFe? I think it's command and control being facilitated by the people at the top. They want to tell the world they're agile so that they can attempt to attract staff and so that they can sit in front of a board meeting and say, hey, we're doing agile. But actually, it's a command and control mechanism. It's a throwback to the old days of software development. It's not good. So, sir, you said that you were using SAFe. There's a phone number. You can call that number, or you could call it now if you want. It's a helpline for SAFe. Please call it. See what happens. Pardon? Oh, well, never mind. Call me later. Okay. Here's my client again. And this is another big thing we see when things are going wrong with Agile. They think that their business is different from every other business, and that's why it's not working. You see this dynamic in a lot of places, not just in the Agile context. For some reason, it won't work for us. Really? Do you think that makes sense? There's something unique about your business that means that stuff that's worked in so many other contexts won't work in your place? I don't think so. And, you know, we're there to try and debunk that notion. So here's a kind of a summary. If you do Agile well, if you're running an Agile business, these are the things that could or should happen for you. These are some of the good outcomes. But what can actually happen is this. And this is where people are when they say, Agile doesn't work for me. Agile is a dirty word. I particularly like the notion that they burn money iteratively, excuse me. So, I think this is the final piece of dysfunction I see, or it might be. One of the most anti-Agile things is budgets. If you are constantly fighting for budgets and people want to allocate budgets for a year, that's a massive anti-pattern. It's anti-Agile. It's obviously anti-Agile. How can I tell you how much money I'm going to need in the next 12 months? So it leads to all sorts of other dysfunction. I mean, for me, some of the silliest things I've seen because of budgets are, I once did a job for Thoughtworks, and it would have cost us something like £250,000 to buy a software as a service version of this thing. And that would have been over a 5-year contract, £250,000. Or we could spend £1 million and install it ourselves, have an on-prem version. So it sounds like a no-brainer, right? But no, we couldn't get the software as a service version because the money allocated to our project had to be spent within 2 years. So we weren't allowed to sign a 5-year contract. And that's just one of the things that happens. In America, I was really pleased with this. I found this a couple of months ago. They're starting to get wise to, the US State Department is starting to get wise to the notion of fake Agile. That's a great article. If you've got some time, have a look at that. They've mapped out and put down on paper, well, virtual paper, a lot of these types of discussions that I've been talking about. So the last thing on this, what does bad look like? What does that Agile is a dirty word look like? Has anybody ever think they've worked in a blame culture? A lot of people don't like to admit it, but yeah, it makes people feel uncomfortable. When things always go wrong, if you have a culture where you learn from your mistakes, where things going wrong is an opportunity to improve, that's great. That's a learning culture. That's not a blame culture. But often you'll find that the purpose of a retro or a wash-up is just to blame someone. Who was responsible for this? We need to fire that person, or we need to do something about it. And I've been involved in these post-mortem type meetings, which are just like it feels like a witch hunt. It feels like somebody wants someone to burn at the stake. It's horrific. I've worked in companies like that. Thoughtworks isn't like that. And you should beware of a hero culture. If you see language in your company literature that says things like, we want to reward people that go the extra mile, we want to recognize people that really put extra effort in, I think that's can often be concealing a blame culture. Because if people are keen to be seen to be taking credit for things, I think that's the other side of the same coin as being keen to avoid getting blamed when it goes wrong. So you need to beware of that hero culture as well. So that's what bad looks like. So what I'm going to go through for the rest of the talk is talk about some techniques that we've used at Thoughtworks, which we've been developing over the last few years to address this whole problem. It's a kind of post-Agile problem where people have been trying Agile and it doesn't work. And that's usually, in the 4 years I've been at Thoughtworks, I've been at 7 or 8 clients. And almost every time I've gone there, I've found this situation where they think that they understand Agile and they're doing Agile, but they're really not. So the first thing to do is to avoid these dirty words. The words I mentioned earlier, Agile, Scrum, Kanban, whatever, try not to talk about them. So how do we do that? So first of all, it's important to understand what Agile is. So, as I've said, Scrum is not Agile. It sometimes works with it. Kanban is not Agile. Process, any kind of prescriptive process that tells you all of the rituals, all the meetings that you should be going through, is not Agile. It's only Agile if you put that together with the values and the principles of the Agile Manifesto. And too often, a lot of people I've worked with have never even read the manifesto, or they're not even aware that it exists. They think that they can go and buy Agile off a shelf. And there are consultants that sell this myth and just say, if you do this Scrum thing, then you're Agile. So we know that doesn't work. So let's talk a bit about what Agile really is about. There are 4 Agile values, and if there's the link down the bottom there to the Agile Manifesto. Martin Fowler from Thoughtworks was one of the people that was at this meeting. I think it was back in 2001. Also, Jim Highsmith worked for Thoughtworks at the time, was at this meeting. So those 4 values are really important. The top one, I think, is the one that I always home in on. It says individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And my own sort of modification of that is I always say to my clients, you need to focus on your outcomes, not your process. So I keep coming back and back to my clients and say, think about outcomes, not process. Whatever process you may put in place should only be to support an outcome. Don't do a process without first considering that. And there are 12 Agile principles that go with those values. That's some of the Agile principles. Now, this is why I've called this avoiding the dirty words. When I was at a client a couple of years ago, one of my colleagues said to me, what's the problem? Why is things not working? And I'd been there like a week. And I told her, well, they don't understand Agile. That's it. That's the problem. And she said to me, well, why don't you do an Agile 101? I said, well, 2 reasons. Number one, they think they do understand Agile. So if I go in front of them and give them an Agile 101, they're really not going to like it. That's going to insult them. But secondly, I didn't want to mention the word Agile because I wanted to talk about the values and the principles rather than anything that might be conflated in people's mind with a process that's broken. So what we came up with was this title for a presentation, TPS, Value Streams and the Theory of Constraints. So that was what I presented. Since I've done a similar presentation a few times, which is based on the Agile values. So essentially what I'm saying is, look at the problems that are in that business. You should be able to pick out some of the Agile values that they're not doing or some of the Agile principles that they're not understanding, mold it into a presentation like this and take it to those people. So now you're giving them a grounding in Agile without mentioning the word Agile. So you're avoiding the dirty words. Here's my client again. MVPs are dirty words. I genuinely had this problem. This client was a luxury brand, and for them, MVP had become toxified because they thought that what an MVP means is a reduced customer service, a reduced customer experience, and they weren't prepared to do that for their customers. So I've got to explain to them, you know what? It's not a reduced customer experience. It doesn't have to be a reduced customer experience. So here's my example. Here's an MVP. And this is my technique of I always try and find things in the world which illustrate Agile values and principles without being software-centric. So this is my friend Fu from Thoughtworks. I used to sit next to him, and I wanted to make this picture with the green glow off the screen that you sometimes see in films, because we wanted to just make a joke about it, that Fu's a hacker, right? So there you go, that's the result. I managed to get the green glow coming off the computer screen. But how did we really make this picture? Well, it's a low-tech MVP, as you can see. There's a mobile phone torch, a green bottle that Fu's holding, and we project the green glow off the computer screen on him. Nobody saw this bit, right? If we wanted to industrialize this process and we found out that people really valued pictures with the green glow, then we'd probably iterate on it and find out a way. But this MVP proved the customer need, because we put it in the newsletter and everybody loved it, and everybody came back and laughed and started asking us, how did you do it? How did you do it? How did you get the computer screen to do that? Well, there you go. So that's my low-tech MVP. Avoid dirty words, but oddly, waste is never a dirty word, wherever you are. A great exercise you can go through is some form of value stream mapping, which illustrates waste. So what we've got is the green stuff at the top, which is value-adding things, the red stuff at the bottom, which is waste, and the dotted lines are transformation, context switches or handovers, which are actually pretty costly. So what does this mean? There's time marching on, and we've only actually returned value to our business here, right at the end, after we've released. Everything else is only leading up to that point. So the whole thing is your value stream. The whole amount of time is what you need to consider. Not just, it might be that the dev work only took 2 hours, but the whole thing took 3 weeks. That's pretty common. So you need to understand that value stream, that waste. And it's not just the monetary waste that might be involved in these pointless processes of risk management theater type stuff. It's the opportunity cost. That's the bigger problem to the business. When you waste time, you waste opportunity, that's the bigger cost. That's the kind of conversation that we need to be having with our clients, twisting the thing around from being cost to value. We'll come back to that later. Here's another quick quiz. This is last summer in the Football World Cup. England were in the semi-finals, and obviously we were all very excited. I happened to be at a conference in Cornwall at the time, which is in the UK. So we all watched it, and then of course England lost, so we're all very upset. And this is afterwards I helped to clear up. Can anybody sort of see where the waste in this picture is? So it's not here, and it's not here, it's down here. Because the value stream that I was working with at the time was, having lost 2-1 to Croatia, having been 20 minutes away from the World Cup final, I was damn sure I was going to get drunk, and I spilt some of my beer. So that's the waste in that picture. My point is that it's not always obvious what the waste is, and we sometimes have to point this out to our clients. We sometimes have to make an effort to illustrate that that thing that you're doing there does not add value. So the interesting thing about eliminating waste is that people start to focus on the actual outcomes that are interesting. Once you start to look at waste and you start to ask the question of, what's the outcome we're working towards, and how does this thing help us get towards that outcome? Naturally, waste starts to be eliminated from the picture. Naturally, you start getting people outcome focused, and you start getting people actually returning value to your business. Here's another question that we often get from our clients. They want to talk about how Agile works. Where does it work? So one technique that I've found very useful over the last few years is to find examples of Agile-like stuff in the real world outside of software delivery, because people are kind of fed up of hearing about software delivery. So I read the newspapers like anybody else. Here's something, again, it's football related, I apologize, but something I read in the Times in October of last year about Jose Mourinho, the now sacked manager of Manchester United. He was still had a job at this time. And it was focusing on a new coach that was a German coach, and there's the crucial paragraph. I'll zoom in on this. So apparently this coach has a revolutionary way of inviting them to help determine the tactics. So he's spreading context amongst everybody and getting people to buy in into team values. How much that stimulated them to review their own performances. Fantastic. So he's instigated some form of review, some form of retro, some form of continual improvement. And this guy's got a God-given talent for motivating and explaining. Well, and a team believes more strongly in a plan if they feel they've had a hand in conceiving it. I love those statements because all of those are Agile values and Agile team building things, and they're buried in a report of a football manager. I don't think he's any kind of genius, this guy. I've never seen his team play football. I just think he's applying Agile principles, Agile practices, Agile values. He's probably never heard of Agile, but there you go. And finally, a dirty word is not tech at core. So this is a Thoughtworks marketing slide that I've modified and simplified. A lot of companies are interested in being a tech company, but they don't understand what that means. And what we have to explain to them is that what it means is that your technology organization is a value creator and not a cost to the business. And that's a big step change for most companies. So we took this a step further with a client we were working at, and we challenged them to tell us where they thought they were on this scale. And we were pretty sure they were right down there, even though outwardly they thought they were a tech company. The reason why they thought they were a tech company is because they did 95% of their business through their website. And then we broke it down into things that we thought would be resonant with them. So we came up with these 4 scales that actually speak to Agile values or their counterparts in misfunction. So in particular, you can see there I've got outcome over process. We've got tech as a value creator, tech as a cost center. Your internal handovers contain empathy because people are aligned on goals, or there's like a transaction going on. There's like, I'm handing it to my test team and they give me a 1-week SLA. That's a transactional handover. If you find your business having transactional handovers, you're not Agile. And finally, we've got quick feedback loops or long cycles that are very reactive. That's a big signpost. There's a book called Accelerate, written by, amongst others, Jez Humble, that used to work for Thoughtworks. I'd urge everybody to read this book if you haven't already. Some of the really interesting insights are there are 4 key metrics to high-performing businesses. And again, you'll notice there's nothing about Agile on this slide. So those 4 key metrics are lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore, and change fail percentage. Notice uptime is not one of them. But if you iterate on those 4 things there and can constantly make them better, your business improves. And there are 24 key capabilities split up into those 5 different categories. If you improve all those 24 key capabilities, your business will improve. So we can talk to these without talking to Agile, but actually it's very closely aligned to the Agile values. So that's how we avoid the dirty words. And there's lots of other techniques. If you look at my blog, there's lots of different articles that I come to talk around these subjects. So, once we've avoided the dirty word, we start to clean up the mess. How do we clean up the mess? Well, one of the first things we have to do is to try and get people thinking in an Agile fashion. One thing they're often not doing is they think they have a fixed plan that they have to stick to. Well, what do I think about fixed plans? Well, that's what I think. Does anybody recognize that quote? Allegedly, it's a quote by Mike Tyson. What I want to, again, here's a way that I've illustrated the notion of being able to pivot. This is something that none of you will recognize, I'm sure. This is a motorway service station in the UK. It's called Leicester Forest East. Now, one day, I'd been working up in the northeast of England all week, and I was driving back down to the south of England where I live. And I happen to know in Leicester Forest Services that there's a KFC. Do you get KFC in this part of the world? I'm sure you do. Get it everywhere else. I love KFC. And up there on that bridge thing that goes over the motorway, there's a KFC. And next door to the KFC, there's a Burger King. Now, Burger King also does chicken products, right? But if you've got a Burger King there and a KFC there, you ain't going to buy a chicken product from the Burger King, right? Not in a million years. That's crazy stuff. And yet, the Burger King up there has an advert for its chicken products, right? And it's always had that advert. And every time I go in there, it really winds me up. Why are you telling me about your chicken products? I am not going to buy chicken when there's a KFC next door. That is just ridiculous. If I'm going to go to the Burger King, I'm going to buy a burger. So what happened to me on this day? Well, there you go. The KFC is closed for refurbishment. Ugh. So I think, well, okay. In that case, I'm going to go to Burger King, which is right next door, and of course I'm going to have a double Whopper burger. But notice there's a notice on the wall there by the Burger King. What does that notice say? Well, you obviously can't read it. Still can't read that. I tried to zoom in. I should have gone closer and taken a photograph closer. But this is what it says. Yes, chicken and vegetarian products are available. I'm not buying a vegetarian product from Burger King. But you know what? Have a nice day. So what happened? I go to the Burger King and I buy this chicken burger, reluctantly. Best chicken product I've ever had in my life. Absolutely amazing. It was a life changer. And my point there is I always use this as an illustration to a CTO who says we have to stick to the plan. I'm like, no, you don't, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what pivot is around the corner because of something you don't know about your customers yet. You need to always bear that in mind. Every time I've since gone to that service station, I've bought a chicken burger from Burger King out of respect for that epiphany. So, what you need to do in any business, I recommend you read this book if you haven't. Understand what your biggest problem is, and then iterate on that biggest problem. Understand flow through your business of your value streams. Fix the biggest problem. When you fix the biggest problem or make the biggest problem less big, it will no longer be the biggest problem. Something else will be your biggest problem. Carry on working on that. And this is a fantastic way to put agile values across. Get people talking and applying the theory of constraints. But now, this is where my own theory comes in. In some of the teams I've been working with, I always say to them, you know, why would I just do everything at once? Big bangs don't work with software for the reasons I mentioned earlier. And for the same reason, if you dump a brand new process on people, it's unlikely to work because it's so much change, people will be confused by it. And then if it works, well, what worked? You don't know because you changed 10 things. If it doesn't work, what didn't work? Again, you don't know. So if you do that, if you do a massive change all at once, the likelihood is it will fail, but it won't be that implementation that will get the blame. It will be Agile that will get the blame. So don't do big bang changes. So I've got an example, I hope, in a couple of slides' time of not doing a big bang change. So it's all about focusing on the outcomes, not the process. Just keep your teams focusing on the outcomes. The reason why I've got the Greek team from 2004 there is because they were rubbish. They played horrible-looking football, but they won the Euros. So nobody cares they played horrible football. It was all about that outcome. We need to get buy-in from everybody on what we're doing. Excuse me for a moment while I just check the slide order. Oh yeah, I am good. Every time you do things in your team, what you need to be doing is get everybody to buy in. What I've found is that if I go into a place as Thoughtworks and I say, you need to do this, here's the decision from us, do this, you're unlikely to get people to buy in. They disagree with it. They think, so a much better approach is to sit down with everybody, find some way of getting those people to do the right decision. And here's an example. Here's tech debt as an illustration. And here's us illustrating tech debt. We went for a workshop. They finally got it. The product people stopped forcing the tech teams to take on extra tech debt. And this is basically an exercise I went through. This took 4 weeks, and this is in the spirit of not changing everything at once. This is their value stream. The green things is stuff they do to write software. You'll notice that there's quite a lot of them, a lot of different processes. The pink stuff is notes, and the blue stuff is outcomes. Really importantly, we were talking about what outcome are you supporting. We've got things like sharing context, code quality, code standards, all sorts of things over there. All of those things are valuable outcomes. So then, over a period of 4 weeks, we finally got round to talking about rituals. And we started matching those outcomes to the rituals. And you see there's a cluster down there about getting the story right at the start. So we iterated on that. At this point, this is 4 weeks into the work with this client, we'd already put in place Tech Huddle to try and get them sharing context earlier on in the story lifecycle. They were all loving it. Things were working really well. And that's us doing a Tech Huddle. We changed the way we did stand-up 1 week from it being focused on people to it being focused on story. So it's a story outcome-related stand-up. I don't care what you did yesterday. All I care about is when I'm going to get this story into live. That's when we return value. So doing story-centric stand-up, and you can see this is our done column. This is from Wednesday. So by Wednesday this week, we'd already done 13 things. In the first 4 weeks I was with this team, we only did about 5 things. So we were cycling about 4 or 5 times as fast. I haven't done the numbers yet. And then finally, this is one of our clients. He's the tech lead of the team that I'm helping at the moment. And this is him looking very nervous, running a workshop for the first time. But then, this is the result of the workshop, and there he is feeling really happy. And what we were doing was understanding all the maintenance type stuff that we needed to do, preventative maintenance, to keep our platform in play. So getting everybody involved, getting them to buy in, that's the most powerful way to start people working, and combining that with one change, slow change, one at a time. So we saw the results of that happening, and the overall result 6 weeks later is that team now has a steady flow of value being returned to the business, and my work is pretty much done with them, and I've been spreading out my time now amongst other teams in the business and applying the same techniques. So over a period of maybe 6 months to a year, we'll be changing the way that all of those teams working by focusing on their important outcomes and by focusing on them driving the change and them buying into the change. So this is the end game. This is where you want to get to. We want you to have autonomous cross-functional teams, no silos, where everybody can do all of the work for their team. So that's your desirable end state. It's really important that every team understands exactly what they do and why they do it. Talk about useful outcomes, getting aligned outcomes, and how teams work internally, work together brilliantly well. And ultimately, what I would love to see everywhere is a learning culture replacing any previous blame culture. If you can all learn from things when they go wrong, if you can change the language from experiments failing or succeeding to, you know what, this thing that is so small, it's so not risky that it's not a failure or a success, it's just result A or result B. Result A increased our business, result B didn't, so we're going to use result A. That's not a failure or a success, it's an experiment. Get that learning culture in place, then you're in a good place. And I think this is just articulating what I just said. I think these are my quotes. I don't think I got these from anywhere. Yeah, that's what I just said. And retros, I hope you do retros. And it's really important, excuse me, this is the Retro Prime Directive. So we read that at the start of every retro to emphasize to people that we're not here to blame people, we're learning. So, when Agile's a dirty word, here's my advice. Understand the history. First of all, avoid talking about it. Then you can start cleaning it up. And you'll know you're clean when you've got the outcomes that we've mentioned. And you'll be in a happy place. So, Agile's not a process. It is about facilitating outcomes. It's only about outcomes. It's a set of cultures and values. It's about your culture and values, and it's about your people. So once you understand what it means and you start putting it in practice, then Agile is not a dirty word. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. We have about 5 minutes for maybe 2 or 3 questions. Don't hesitate to raise your hand.
Yeah, hi, thank you for presentation. So, question from my side is about retrospectives. On your opinion, should they be mandatory each iteration, or they can be done when there is some problems or some stuff to be discussed?
Was that retros, was your question?
Yeah, retros, yeah.
Okay, so I think the question translates to when should I do a retro? So I think it's up to each team to introduce a useful cadence to a retro, whether that's every week or every 2 weeks. If you only do retros when things are done wrong, I think you're in danger of not amplifying the good things, because you'll be focusing on the bad things. So I think my recommendation would be to have a regular cadence, but it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to your cadence of sprints if you're doing sprints or whatever. So always in the teams I've worked in, I think in the early days it's better to have them often, like every 2 weeks maybe, because there's potentially a lot of change coming. But then once you've got a more mature team, I think my preference would probably be settling down to maybe every 3 weeks, maybe every 4 weeks, something like that. So I think when the team is learning about how it works, have them more often. And as the team understands its work better, you probably find you don't need as many. There's probably less nuclear changes to make. But ultimately, you should do them. And I think it's important to stick to the regular cadence, because then, as I say, that will amplify the good stuff as well as eliminating the bad stuff.
Thank you. And time for one more question. No questions? So thank you very much.
Thank you.